All right, so we're going to move into, before lunch, a half an hour kind of reflection session. So if Mark and Eric can come and join me on stage. What I'd like everybody to do is do a Slido. So if you think about, we're just about to finish the morning session. If you take out your phones, again, you've got the codes on the, whatever that's called, on your desks. Just a couple of words about what are your present two key takeaways from this morning. If you want to put questions into Slido, do. If we can, we'll get to them in these reflection sessions. And also, Esma Lisbeth is going to be getting questions from the floor. I can't see Lisbeth, I can't see the lights. Great. So you know Mark and you know Margot. I want to introduce you to Eric if you don't know him. So Eric is the new MD from Total Energy EP Denmark. So how many weeks in the job? It's like 2 weeks into the job. So it's delightful to have you here so early in your new position. And just a couple of things about Eric. He's from a strong operational background, so 20 years working in drilling and field operations. And interestingly, going to Mark's talk, has spent the last 18 months working in digital transformation. And what's interesting is they're bringing people from operations and the business to work on the digital transformation, not the kind of IT gurus, but actually bringing people with that depth of operational experience. So given all of us have had a chance to speak, let's start with key reflections from you from this morning.
So thank you very much. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. No, it was very interesting this morning, and I fully concur with what I've heard. But I like what you said about the safety transformation. And what I want to highlight this morning, we talk mainly about a disaster or major event. But what I would like to share is what the oil industry give to me or provide to me. You know, I've been in this industry for maybe more than 20 years. I started with some training when I was in university with Schumacher, then with Halliburton, then I was with Total. So more than 20 years where we have some training, exposure, we do a lot of regulation, we've been through so many situations that we have had a lot of learnings, and in fact it's transformed ourselves, in fact. And in terms of safety at home today, it's completely different. I mean, there's been a transformation compared to 20 years ago, where I used to do things differently in my personal life. And this is about safety culture. I mean, it's when you have no boundaries or no frontier between the personal work, the personal life and your professional work, in fact. And today, if you come to my house or to my home, I can tell you when I put PP when I'm gardening, I put special thing when I'm doing DIY, we do reverse parking, but it's not obvious for all the people around. And when I'm looking at my neighbors, you know, they do not have the same standards. But I'm very glad that I have this culture and that this job teach me a lot of things, in fact, a lot of things. And really, I'm not the same person after 20 years. And I think it's important to share with the other industry because we have quite a high standard within the oil and gas, and I'm sure we can transfer the knowledge we have to, like the wind industry, for instance, which is a younger industry, I think.
I think it's really interesting, the person, because I for myself as well, working in this area has changed me completely, completely. So I don't want to do kind of an interrogation, so we want to have more of a roundtable discussion than an interrogation, but I am going to pose one question and then we'll see where the conversation takes us, and then I'll call on Lisbeth in a sec to give us some reflections from the audience. So my question is, which was prompted by something that you said, is, are accidents inevitable? So I think, you know, from my experience in oil and gas and in construction is we try and avoid accidents. Yeah. But you seem to have a very different approach, which is, okay, accidents are going to happen. How can we make them happen safely? Yeah. So just as a question to all of us is, are accidents inevitable? And we'll start with you.
Well, as I said in my presentation, the risks in our industry haven't changed in terms of the inherent activity. it hasn't changed in 70 years, and so the risks are still there, and the potential for a catastrophic accident and loss of life remain. So, and as a sporting tournament, we know that, again, based on data, we know that we will have accidents. Now, what we do is, operationally, we do everything we can to prevent that from happening. And, I mean, we don't like to talk about sanctions too much, but there are a lot of penalties in Formula One. And actually, one of the criticisms of modern Formula One from fans and media is how often we penalize drivers. The reason we have those penalties is to keep driving home the message that whatever else you do, endangering the safety of yourself and others is not part of the agenda. And so this is why when Max Verstappen has that accident that occurred on Sunday, and it was entirely avoidable, and you know, we can argue about it all day long, but it was entirely avoidable. And my personal opinion, professional opinion maybe, he showed his immaturity. Because, you know, tonight on Netflix, the Michael Schumacher documentary is being launched. And, you know, one of the reasons Michael was a superb competitor was he learned that you can't win every race. Sometimes you have to finish second or third, and that's fine. And that's how you win a world championship. Max has still got to learn, I think, some of those lessons. But anyway, to your question, accidents are inevitable. So we do everything we can to prevent them, but we then have a very realistic, honest conversation about, okay, so when the accident does occur, what is it that leads to the human being having an injury or worse? And then we work back from that. And that's why Professor Sid Watkins played such a key role in driving our safety transformation, because Sid, you know, Sid was the person who attended to Ayrton Senna. And so Sid, and he was a personal friend. So, you know, if Sid were still with us, he'd be sitting here with a tear in his eye telling you that story. So the reality is that you take someone like Sid and you say, okay, so you're a medical professional. What is it that leads to loss of life? And he can give you the top reasons, because we have all the data from all the past accidents. We know what it is that kills people. So therefore, we work back from that point and say, okay, so when he says to us that Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger were both killed that weekend with the same basilar skull injury, how do you stop basilar skull injuries? Well, that's why we brought in the HANDS device, because it protects the neck, it spreads the load, and it ensures from an engineering solution to a medical problem, so to avoid that injury. And so the list goes on and on. So we take an engineering approach to ensuring that when that accident does occur in an industry where risk is inherent, that we don't just throw up our hands and say, oh, well, you know. We tried. Yeah. You know, we tried to stop it happening. That's not good enough. You know, we tried to stop it happening. And by the way, when it happened, we still had a whole bunch of barriers in place, literally, that meant that Romain Grosjean went home to his wife and kids at the end of the day.
Great. Thoughts, comments?
Thoughts. Well, I really don't like the question, and maybe it's because so many years of my professional life, I came from this assumption that accidents happen. If you want to make an omelet, you will break some eggs. And I've really worked hard at getting away and develop this intolerance to accidents. So for me, it's like it's not a place I want to go. I can't think of an accident right now that couldn't have been avoided. So should it have happened? I don't think so. So I understand the logic and the pragmatic approach, but for me and from my construction industry, it's a dangerous way to go because we can't manage it. That's my opinion.
There is an interesting, I'm not interrupting you, Eric, but there is an interesting point that often gets raised when we have private dinners before an event like this. So Formula One has historically been a male-dominated sport. I'm talking in terms of the drivers, the engineers, the mechanics, everyone. So there's a lot of testosterone, and that has led to lots of problems in the past in terms of behaviors. And whenever I am invited into the construction sector, that's often a point that's mentioned to me by people in the construction industry. And so one of the things that I'm seeing a massive change in our industry is that because we've put a lot of energy into diversity, we're seeing a lot more women in frontline roles. What's interesting is there are still a small number of women working in Formula One, but actually the women who are working in it are working in senior roles. So today, in 2021, exactly 50% of the people who run race strategy are women.
Wow.
And they have, they're running the races remotely. So when Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton is winning a Grand Prix, it's a woman who's working at the strategy with her team back at base. And we know that this has a major impact on behaviors. The guys behave differently. The women are helping the organization in terms of quality of decision making. And we have worked long and hard over the last 20 years to get rid of that lad culture, that gang culture. It has no place in our environment. We need people to not only get the job done, but to look after each other. And that diversity shift is definitely another factor that's helping us, I think.
That's great.
I fully agree with what you have said. The accident could be avoided. I think most of them, they could be largely avoided. And yes, we do have some events, and we learn from the events. And what we do as well, we learn a lot from what we call the high potential incident. So it's an accident that didn't occur, but that could occur. And on this one, we try to analyze, investigate, and take the action before something happens again. On the behavior and the sanction you are talking, we have as well in a policy, it's a reward and sanction. I think we have to celebrate as well when we have a good behaviors or good performance or something which is very important. So we have those two, in fact. We have to counterbalance recognition and sanction.
It's really an interesting conversation for me. So I do a lot of reading around safety, obviously, and there's big debates around target zeros or should you have zeros. And I kind of feel myself a little bit pulled like you are because, and I think everybody here, nobody wants people to suffer life-changing injuries or die, and there's a personal commitment to that inside of where, I mean, you can see it in all of the speeches, you can see it in your sharing about the fatalities. We're wanting people to go home to their families. But I do find very interesting the stand, for lack of a better word, that you have is people won't be injured and they won't die, not that there won't be accidents.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if in oil and gas we've gotten too attached to zero, and actually if we got attached to people not dying or having life-altering injuries, that might not open something that we can't currently see.
So my industry is very close to the automotive and transportation sector, and if you look at the Euro NCAP program, which is the European New Car Approval Program, where you crash test cars and you award them with a star rating.
Yeah.
That was introduced because Formula One went to the European Union and said, we're trying to drive to zero driver fatalities. Would you be interested? And the European Union said, oh, yes. And when they looked at the crash testing in the European Union in the mid-1990s, it hadn't changed in 20 years. Well, the problem is when you crashed a car in 1973, you were going a lot slower. You didn't have anything like the technology which is now in a car. So Formula One worked with the European Union, and Louis Schweitzer, who was the chief executive at Renault Group, decided to make the Renault Espace as safe as possible, actually the Renault Espace and the Scenic, and to market those cars based on safety. And everyone told him, safety doesn't sell. I mean, you've got to sell on 0 to 100 kilometers. You've got to sell in terms of comfort and luxury. So he was groundbreaking, and it changed the car industry. And actually, he did what Volvo had already tried to do, make safety sexy. Now, here's the thing. Today, we have a 9/11 on the roads of the world every day.
Yeah.
Nearly 5,000 people a day get killed. And those accidents happen. So for us, what we've done there is to try and export our know-how to say, well, look, the accident will happen. So if you're on the school run and someone hits you because they're drink driving, drug driving, whatever, we are terrible at driving. The reality is we want to put in place the technological solutions that means you will not be injured, or if you are injured, you will not lose your life. And that's why over the last 20 years, airbags, crash structures, et cetera, have all become commonplace, because we're trying to move that philosophy into the world of mobility. No one's arguing anymore. So it is a different approach, because otherwise you would just build a car with no safety systems and say, let's hope we don't have an accident.
Yeah, and my thing is, I think we sometimes get stuck on the targets versus the actual injuries or fatalities. So Lisbeth, I know, has somebody from the audience, and I don't know where Lisbeth is because the lights are, there you are, the lights are so bright, I can't see you. So you have somebody that has a reflection from this morning's session or a question?
Yeah. Could you please tell us who you are?
Hi, I'm Nina. I'm working for the Copenhagen Metro project together with Margaret also, working to develop our safety culture on our projects. And I'll be happy to share just some of my reflections, especially the first Challenger Act and Jill's presentation made me think that why do people take these really bad decisions? So politicians, decision makers, or even employees putting themselves at risk. Why do we do that? What drives that, and what's the reward? So I think a lot of that could be traced back to, well, something very simple. So what are we acknowledging? What are we being acknowledged for? And I think it's very fundamental for people to seek acknowledgement, to seek accomplishment, to seek appreciation. It's a very powerful force, and I think that we should take that into consideration when we want to change something, to change a culture, or to change the system, as that systematic change that Jill also showed us. So that was just a reflection upon some of the first presentations.
Wonderful, Nina, and thank you for speaking up in front of all of these people. So we've got around 8 minutes. What I'd like to do is to give everybody a chance just for some final reflections and an invitation if you want to pick up on Nina's point around decision making. So just any final reflections and anything around decision making. And who wants to? Eric, Margot? You go, Margot.
You put me on the spot there.
I did.
Well, it's just what we were just talking about now. I keep thinking that I just personally don't think we're ready to let go to the assumption that it is possible for everybody to go home safe. And why people do the things they do also has to do with very much acknowledgement, but also the environment that you're in. And that's where we need to up the bar a little bit in where we came from before and show that this is what we want. I would really wish that we could have a bigger collaboration with more Danish clients, public clients doing the same construction work as we do or similar, so that we weren't so alone in doing what we're doing. And I think that's the next step for us, that we start spreading it out. Because I feel that there is still this a little bit old, outdated approach to safety in this country, which is why you may see that your neighbors don't understand why you're putting on your PPE when you do gardening. Because it's a different approach in the Danish culture, in my opinion.
I remember one of the things that you shared with me is the fatality didn't even make the media. So there's
Very
something,
briefly, yeah.
There's something when you were saying,
wow.
And we were talking last night at dinner around, there's some statistics where there's these phenomenal numbers of injuries in certain sectors, and it doesn't even make the public domain.
Exactly.
It doesn't even register. So I think where that reputational damage in media becomes a driver for change. In many industries, it's not, which is quite sobering. on reflection.
But it has to do with the environment that you enter. And I think it would be wonderful if we, in our next project, had culture saying, ooh, we're building for the metro company. We really need to have focus on safety.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Because we did it in oil gas, and they were the same. That would be
great.
Then we've arrived somewhere really good in our journey.
Great, thank you.
So I was talking about my home in France, in fact.
Okay, really? It's like that.
I'm not to blame the Danish.
In Denmark, you don't whip.
No, I was thinking about what you were saying between the manager hat and the engineer hat. I think it's very interesting, and today I've just been nominated as a MD in Total Denmark, which is a very big affiliate, but I should not forget where I was coming from, and I came from an engineering background, and I was a site manager offshore with 500 people offshore, and I will always remember what I expect from the management when I was in those positions. I think it's very important to be very supportive to them, to be listening, to what you said this morning, in fact, open-minded, and be ready to accept when I meet with them. I say, you are my eyes offshore, in fact, on front line. It's very important for me to get the feedback and to know what's going on.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna put my speaker hat on now, not engineering, speaker hat on now. So on the decision making and linking in with something you said, is I do think diversity, there's two thoughts that I have. So number one, I think diversity brings best decision making, and I think gender balancing is one big access to that. But speaking also as a woman who works in male-dominated industries, I think often there's pressure as a woman to be like a man. And I think when you're practicing diversity, what you're wanting is the fullest expression of woman, not women trying to be like men. So I think diversity is critical, but I think there's a lot in the gender diversity conversation that we don't talk about at all. And it's great here, there's 50%, which is, again, unusual. So I think on decision-making, diversity is absolutely critical, and I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten it, so okay. Well, over to you.
Well, I'm going to pick up on a point that, so my closing comment would be a point that you made about people talking to you off the record and saying, the politicians don't care.
Yeah.
The chief executive doesn't care. I spoke at a safety conference for an oil company in the Gulf, and it was a great event, really good event, and everyone said all the right things. And afterwards, one of the local, I'm not going to say which country it was, but one of the local managers, very, very senior vice president in the company, but a young guy in his 40s came up to me and said, "That was amazing. We had such a good safety conference." He said, "You do realize we don't care?" And I said, "You don't care?" And he said, "No." He said, "Because most of our workers are expats and immigrant workers, and like we've had 17 fatalities. If it was one of our own people, it would be a major problem because it would be in the media." And I've never forgotten that conversation. And I'm not talking, that's not many years ago. And after the safety conference in the morning, they were having a conference in the afternoon about how their business could expand globally and how they could diversify their business and create, growth in the business. So I said to him, "You do realize that you will never grow your business because no one will want to do business with your organization. Who wants to deal with your organization?" And he was quite shocked. And I said, you have to take that, you have to realize that not just in the Western world, but in the world of business, which is now a very small place, all of your outcomes are scrutinized. And if your business is not doing the correct things and having the right behaviors and walking the walk around safety, you may as well forget the glossy brochure. So it is really interesting to hear your presentations, and I think a conference like this is so powerful because you get all the inputs from different sectors, and we all end up actually with remarkably similar hit lists. So whether it's Formula One or whether it's in the construction industry or whether it's Total, actually we all we're all on the same page. It's a question of communicating that page to the correct people and getting that visibility. And I think this point about, you know, an accident not even making the media is a real criticism of society.
Yeah.
It's a huge criticism of society. And then Grenfell, all over the media, because it's 72 people in the centre of London, the largest fatality since the Second World War. And there's something in that. And I think visibility puts pressure on politicians and chief executives. And maybe that's another line of attack on the safety campaign.
And I do think, just to close out the session, is as sustainability gets more and more focus, is organizations won't be able to go, oh, we're great on sustainability, but we killed 15 people this year. So, you know, safety is part of the sustainability journey. So I think there's something, as investors are getting smarter around, you know, and all the focus on governance, et cetera, is it will become increasingly difficult for organizations to get away with fatalities, and for that not to be an issue for boards and investors. Thank goodness. I mean, it's sad that it will take investors to cause that to happen, but sometimes, you know, the routes to change are not linear. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you. We're going to take an hour for lunch. Again, if you go upstairs, there's food, and visit the exhibitions, and then be back here. Thank you. Thanks.